Right guys, hello. Now I am working on part 4 of Dark Origins this week, but before that there have been several things that are stacking up in this past month that I want to smash through. So this is kind of a mini channel update, but also a view of a few upcoming things. Now I have time-stamped this video as always, so if there's one thing that doesn't appeal to you, you can just check down below. Now in short today I'm going to be covering about Darktide, the new books from Games Workshop and their implications, and in fact a big new addition for the channel in 2021, and a bonus at the end for any of you out there who are active 40k players. So first up, Darktide. Now there's a lot of hype around Darktide, and if there's one thing we know by now, it's that game hype should be scaled truly as much as possible. And I would say that we should all be applying that 2 or 3 times more strictly, with 40k games being notoriously hit and miss. Now saying that, does Darktide look like it has a bigger potential than most of the other things that have come our way when it comes to 40k games? Yes, it does. However, I want to scale that by saying it quite clearly does not look a million miles away from something like, for very obvious reasons, Vermintide, and then also Deathwing, because running around in a very 40k environment, check. 4-player co-op, check. Hordes of enemies, check. This one though is set within a hive city, and rather than being a Terminator in Terminator armor, we're looking at much more human elements and not even necessarily space marines, which is possibly why this one is so appealing to people, because despite the almost default acceptance of games being focused on space marines, I think there is at this point a big appetite for people playing as human protagonists. And I can very much imagine a game similar to the 2011 game Space Marine, but with an Imperial Guard protagonist being incredibly popular. Or let's be real, any protagonist. Just give us more decent third-person slash and smash 40k games with a half-decent storyline, please. Now, before you all start saying boo Luton because I'm not fawning over the game, look, I'm not saying the game's going to be bad. In fact, it's looking so far like it's going to be a very decent 40k effort. But if there's one thing we should all be more than well aware of by now, it's that in the realm of video games you judge on the game itself, and that is 40k games. So we can be hopeful, we can be intrigued, but scale that hype. And saying that, another positive for us that I'm showing here is what appears to be actual gameplay, and that is a very good thing. I'm always extremely suspicious of games which only show you cinematics pre-release, and that is something which we are very used to 40k games doing, is using a trick of showing nothing but cinematics right up until the release day. So it is very refreshing, positive, and somewhat reassuring to see the devs are confident enough to put any gameplay at all into a trailer. Now, what is the most important thing I've taken away from the Darktide stuff so far? Well, mainly the tone. The tone of the game seems so far very fitting neatly into 40k. The characters in both the trailers seem very fitting within the lore, and this latest trailer we hear them rattling off the very standard stuff.
Burn the heretic, kill the mutant, purge the unclean, master of mankind, grant us strength.
We're here for that. But also, you see one of the characters where the enemies are closing in, and she's got this expression of like, as if she's almost literally thirsty for battle to crush the heretics. And I can literally imagine her getting showered with the blood of enemies while she's bisecting a cultist in half and still screaming for more. This is a good thing. That line between Imperial devotion and Khorne never quite goes away. In the trailer, we cut to enemies being turned into absolute bloody gore and carnage, just as you would hope and expect. So it's a good thing. Darktide is looking like it has good potential in the realm of 40k games. Very obviously it has some overlap with things we've seen before, as it's a co-op horde shooter, but you know, if you're into 40k, you're probably one of those people like me where if it's got 40k on it, you're just going to buy it. So I'm feeling pretty good about it, so let's see where things go. If I have an opportunity to bring you any gameplay earlier or anything like this, I'll endeavour to do so, but I think it's honestly one of those games that's going to just speak for itself. I don't think necessarily seeing preview gameplay is going to really be a big deal. I think it's been one of those things when it comes out, you just got to look at it for what it is. And I also think that from what we have seen, we kind of know what it's going to be, right? It's going to be 40k Vermintide. That's basically what it's going to be, and everybody seems to be absolutely fine with that. But it's also like when we talk about Space Marine, you know, a lot of people who are not into 40k judged Space Marine and said, oh, it's very repetitive, you know, the combat mechanics are they're not very deep combat mechanics, it's kind of a boring game, it's not particularly hugely deep narrative in there. That's from people that are not into 40k. The people that are into 40k are like, Space Marine is the best game ever, it's the best game ever, I want to see another 10 games like this game, you know. So there's a line between people that are not into 40k and what they think of those games, and the people that are into 40k and how they view stuff. Now, just before we get into going through some of these new book reveals, I want to say there's a lot of links down below. I've put the link to the actual preview page. I put some other links there for suggestions. So if you want to go check that stuff out there, it's all in the notes below this video. And you should always check in the notes below the videos because sometimes we throw some links in there and so on and so on. Now, first of all, Black Library. Books, books, books. Now, I don't normally make big mentions about specific book releases, mainly because they're so frequent and just ongoing. But there are several that Black Library have just announced. I say just announced, 5th of December. But I couldn't get to it because I was doing all the Dark Origin stuff. But they're significant, and so I thought, seeing as I was making this video today, I would make mention of it. But it also does tie in with another announcements that I've got, which will come later in this video. Now, Games Workshop Black Library have been delivering an ever-increasing pace with their book releases, which is, on the one hand, great. On the other hand, for me, royal pain in the ass, because up until now it's been fairly easy to stay on top of the lore, but stuff's coming out so much now it's becoming almost impossible given the quantity of titles being released. On the other hand, a lot of books tend to cover things that are already established, and so the actual new details in some of these new books are actually not necessarily so critical. They're often quite sparse, in fact, and you can actually often wither it down to a few specific points, like in Saturnine, for example. Saturnine was a very good and interesting read, but overall, in terms of what it added into the verse, you could pick and choose a few pieces. Still a very good read, still very good in the context of the verse. It adds a lot in terms of just the sort of emotional material there, but in terms of specific details that it added, quite sparse. So although there is a lot of material coming out, it's scalable sort of how much detail is being added. Anyway, enough blurb. It definitely helps, as I've said so often in 40k, because like I said, it's vague, it's contradictory, and that means that like even I can make an odd error here and there, you can just correct it later because that's how 40k is. It's quite forgiving, which is a good thing. So first we're talking about Mortis, which is going to be the 5th book in the Siege of Terror series. Now this series has developed well as it's gone along. I definitely recommend taking the effort of going through what I felt were the slightly slower first books in this series, like Solar War, Lost and the Damned, as they lay the groundwork to get into the more substantial stuff like First Wall, Selenar, Saturnine. Mortis, however, is looking at one of our favourite things here on the channel, that is Titan Legions, and I am very ready for this. The book summary describes how the victories of Saturnine and the sacrifices of the Eternity Wall spaceport have faded into the hope of yesterday, denied but not defeated. The traitors intensify their assault on the Imperial Palace, with the principal spaceports in Horus's hands. The Warmaster now drains the heavens of his reserves. As the pressure of the assault increases, the power of chaos waxes. The waking lives of the defenders are filled with despair, while their dreams pull them in search of a false paradise. As the fabric of the defences fails, and the will of those who stand on them cracks, Horus commands the Titans of the Legio Mortis to breach the walls. Against them stands the might of Mercury Wall and the strength of the Legio Ignatum. Ancient rivals, the god engines of both legions, meet in battle, while within the walls a few desperate individuals seek a way to turn back the tide of the warp's malign influence. Across Terra, lost warriors and travellers make their way through wastelands and gardens of horror towards home and an unknown future. Now, I don't know about you, but that preamble blurb is some serious appetite-whetting material, so I'm feeling very enthused to get my hands on this latest instalment in this series, perhaps more so, in fact, than any of the others that have come so far. Plus, it includes this amazing piece of art for the cover, which, as many people have noted, what is this guardsman yelling at? Please put your best answers down below, which I likely will regret asking that question. Now, next we have something I know many people will have already been pinging me about, as if I could have missed it, guys, please. Games Workshop, more specifically the author Guy Haley, will be revisiting Dark Imperium and releasing a new title in the series. For those of you who may be unaware, Dark Imperium and its sequel Plague War will now be forming a trilogy via a new book, Godblight. Except this represents more than just the release of an additional novel. Unusually, Guy Haley has gone back to rewrite and revise events from the previous Dark Imperium. The events contained within here basically established previously, a solid chunk of the modern material around the Primaris, the Ultima Founding, and the Indomitus Crusade. Now, for those of you with no patience, the too long didn't read version is there's a small timeline tweak. That's basically all you need to know. If you don't want to hear anything else, you can skip on. But basically, that is it. For many people, what's happening here with Dark Imperium and Plague War constitutes what you may wish to describe as a retcon. Now, am I going to go off on a huge rant about this? Sort of. Yes. Okay. Yes, I am. Now, if you want to skip my rambling rant about retcons, because I am going to do that, I have timestamped it. That's how good I am to you guys, so check below if you want to move on. But for those of you who I know enjoy my rambles, you should likely already know my personal opinion on this, that retcons are simply not a thing in 40k. Now, spare me your examples, okay? Necrons, Ollie P, 13th Crusade, we all know them by now. We know the memes, and I wasn't even asking that as a question, okay? What I'll simply say is that I would like to remind you that 40k authors, including Gav Thorpe and Aaron Dembski-Bowden, have previously stated this to be the case. Gav Thorpe previously stated that with Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000, the notion of canon is a fallacy. Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 exist as tens of thousands of overlapping realities in the imaginations of games developers, writers, readers, and gamers. None of those interpretations is wrong. ADB said, there is no canon. There are several hundred creators all adding to the melting pot of the IP. So this is also not Blutin wishing for anything you can think of to be read in 40k. Some salty people in the comments often throw that at me. In fact, for clarity, I even asked ADB via Twitter about this specific issue. And I asked, did they stand by this idea of there being no canon in 40k? I wanted to clarify this. Now happily, he actually replied to me. In fact, actually the 40k authors on Twitter are pretty good at replying to people. And what ADB said was, it's not the way of Star Wars. He also said there are truths of how the setting functions, but that often conflicts will exist between events and characterizations, and that one writer is not necessarily bound to others' interpretations. So when it comes to my view that retcons are not a thing in 40k, I think that this idea is both established and quite consistent. Now you're of course entitled to hold a different opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, it is a completely settled matter at this point. Now I know very well that this idea of there being no set-in-stone canon triggers some people, but look, the blunt truth is, that's just not my problem. I don't decide these things, I don't decide how the setting of 40k works, but it's simply clear at this point that just because something is stated in official material at one point does not mean that this could not change in the future, or even later be reverted to its original state. You could actually have something updated and then go backward again. Just depends on the clarity and the context of the situation. And this also doesn't mean that anyone can make up anything they want. Okay, I've often seen people say this, oh, people can just make up anything. No, okay, this is obviously an extremely disingenuous, hopefully sarcastic opinion to state. Whenever we talk about the material of the 40k verse, the lore, we're talking about officially produced background books and novels, not just something that somebody randomly writes, okay? What this amounts to is exactly what I have said before, that within other verses, okay, you may see what some might consider to be a hard retcon, okay, within Star Wars, within other sci-fi verses. That is to say, you see things change dramatically in usually a very immersion-breaking way. They just basically bin a load of stuff and write new things in there. Now within 40k, that concept doesn't really exist, and I am certain that people will disagree with me, but it's my view that those things do not really exist, specifically because of how 40k is constructed. It's not to say that big changes don't happen, but the difference is that any huge change by the very nature of 40k is not necessarily immersion breaking. And that's the difference. And the reason is that within 40k, and mainly we're talking about the Imperium, everything is so vague and near enough unknowable. This means that yes, events and details can in fact be revised by centuries, entire timelines can be altered. You might choose to call that a retcon. In fact, authors, including Guy Haley, do call it a retcon. But within the context of what we generally understand that to be, specifically for 40k, it's not. What I would say is that I think a better way to consider it is more like things are becoming clearer. That perhaps the information we had before was not necessarily completely wrong, it was just that new information has come forward. Or maybe the information that we had before was propaganda, or it was some plot of misdirection by Tzeentch. The possibilities for how you might want to rationalize it are endless. And that's kind of the clever and quite unique, really, mechanic around the lore of 40k. Now, I can fully understand how that is unappealing to some, but it just is how 40k is. And that's really the bottom line. You can just take it or leave it. My analogy for it is kind of like when a movie ends without clearly defining the outcome of, say, the main protagonist. Do they survive? Do they live happily ever after? Do they suffer a horrible fate despite surviving some very challenging events through the course of a movie? This kind of ambiguous ending for some people is absolutely fine. They make their own determination. I am one of those people. I don't care if I don't know what happens at the end. I'll just make up my own rationalization. But some people absolutely hate this. They hate not knowing. They hate there being some kind of unknown. They want all the details to be very neatly tied and squared away for them. And really, that is just a subjective difference. It's a subjective point of view between different people. Now, it's shocking, I know, but not everybody agrees on how things should be handled when it comes to a fictional world. 40k, by its design and nature, is an ambiguous verse. I've explained this many times, many of the ways in which this happened, from both the Inquisition, the handling of time, the suffocating bureaucracy, chaos manipulation, just plain destruction of records and the loss of general human knowledge. Now, I know I've talked about this all before, I know it, but it genuinely feels like a lot of people just still don't get it. So hopefully this hammers that home, although something tells me this will not be the last time I end up having to go through all of this again. So what does this all mean for Dark Imperium, Plague War and the new book Godblight? Well, not only is Guy Haley releasing a new book in what will now be a trilogy, he's going back to revise Dark Imperium and Plague War. This is by far and away not an especially common thing for Games Workshop books. Codex material slightly more so, but not so often with the novels. The reason I feel that they can get away with this is that, for one, the material surrounding the time of Guilliman's return and the Ultima founding, the Indomitus Crusade, was already fairly thin on the ground. Really, only Dark Imperium and then also the 3 books which came out at the start of the 8th edition, the Gathering Storm supplements. Point is, Dark Imperium and Plague War are some of the best groundwork for this new era in 40k, along with the Dawn of Fire series, but that's a little different. You can throw in the new codexes as well, and of course the rulebook lore, blurb, and so on and so on. In an interview, which you can watch on the linked page, I've posted it down below in the notes of this video, Guy Haley, the author, describes to us how the events of Dark Imperium tie heavily into the Indomitus Crusade. We knew this already. This is when Guilliman set out to push back against the encroaching forces of Abaddon, the Despoiler, and his 13th Crusade that destroyed Cadia, and so on. Guy says that their focus right now is heavily on the Indomitus Crusade, just in general, and this is in fact leaning toward something that I have suspected for a while, but I'll expand on that momentarily. Now, as I said earlier, this is where in this audio interview Guy specifically says that they're going to retcon things within this period. I've covered my thoughts on this, and I should note that Guy saying this actually, like I said, conflicts with others and my view. What a lovely, lovely, catastrophic void mess 40k is, and we love it for that reason. Specifically though, Guy Haley, he says that this means that they've had to move the time at which Dark Imperium and Plague War are meant to have occurred. So now, instead of happening at the end of the Indomitus Crusade, they're occurring as part of the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade. Another critical thing here is that he says if you've read them before, that is Dark Imperium and Plague War, the differences are not massive. Now that is very important, because I think some people thought that these books were going to totally turn things around. As I've said before, I'm not expecting that suddenly we're going to have everything we know about this modern period for the Imperium turned on its head just through the alterations which are made here. I never thought that. That's not what this is going to be. What this represents is that they are just simply nudging the timeline to enable them to do more with the Indomitus Crusade. Specifically, my thoughts are that as we see the Horus Heresy series coming towards its close through the Siege of Terror books, this means that Games Workshop and Black Library are going to want some new sort of Imperial-based ongoing series. And this is why I believe they're making this change. Previously, like I've said, Gathering Storm, Dark Imperium, some of the other books like Belisarius Call in the Great Work were really providing us with just some rough background for the 8th edition of 40k. However, now we're into 9th edition and things are very clearly moving toward a more defined and a very fleshed out stage. So it's my belief that the Indomitus Crusade is going to start to become something akin to Horus Heresy 2, but in an ongoing forward progressing timeline. Now, a lot of obvious reasons why they would choose to do this. For starters, the Heresy series has always been very popular. The second being it gives them a new ongoing product to work on that people can readily consume, so this is why I think it's happening. It brings the modern events into a place where they can be built upon rather than just saying, well, this stuff all happened already, that's already squared away. Now it's kind of open-ended. So what this represents is not some huge shake-up, not some gigantic retcon which destroys everything we know. Really, it is just a little bit of a timeline tweak, which, as we know in 40k, timelines are already a chaotic mess. So this really is no big deal at all. Things have simply moved from being about a century to coming back to being more like a decade. So Guy makes the point that by reframing this book, at this point it enables them to write in elements mentioned as well in other subsequent books which came after Dark Imperium, and other things as well which are still to be released. So essentially, Dark Imperium and Plague War will now feature cross-references with other books, and that's going to help embed them more permanently within the timeline of ongoing events, which on the whole I consider to be quite the positive thing. And it is in fact this which I think best highlights the positive side of the chaotic nature of the 40k verse, and basically not having things be set in stone, because it enables tweaks like this to happen, which do not really turn things upside down, but do help to further embed events for us and give them extra embellishment. Now I'll finish this section by reading the blurb overview about the new book, Godblight. The paths of Robert Guilliman and his fallen brother Mortarion bring them inexorably together on Ajax. Once a jewel of the Imperium, the Garden world is dying, as the plans of Mortarion to use it as a fulcrum to drag all the stellar realm of Ultramar into the warp come to deadly fruition. While Guilliman attempts to prevent the destruction of his kingdom, Mortarion schemes to bring his brother low with the Godblight, a disease created in the cauldron of Nurgle itself with the power to destroy a son of the Emperor. Primarchs clash on the ravaged landscapes of Ajax, the gods go to war, and the wider galaxy balances on a knife edge of destruction. There's something powerful stirs in the Sea of Souls, only one thing is certain. Whoever wins the last great clash of the Plague War, the repercussions will echo down eternity. Now next we have something that I'm very excited for, a Graham McNeill book, and this is the return of Auriel Ventress in the book Swords of Calth. Now if this name rings a bell, it should, as Auriel Ventress is the main character who is featured across 9 novels at my count, including of course the infamous Dead Sky Black Sun. This is the Demonculaba novel where Ventress is sent off in exile to the demon world of Medrengard. Now Auriel is a difficult character to summarise easily, other than to say that he is really a legend within the Imperium, and specifically the Ultramarines. He has been through a considerable range of ordeals, missions and personal trials, and he has now, like many Astartes, gone through the process of conversion to a Primaris, and as Graham describes to us in the interview, which again you can watch on the page that I've linked in the video notes below, he talks about how Auriel is changed by this extremely traumatic process. I think this is something people often underestimate when it comes to Space Marines. I see people regularly conflate Marines with something a little bit more anonymous, like Imperial Stormtroopers from Star Wars, who are always just blasting at stuff, running around, you never really know who's who. Space Marines are in fact all individuals. Some are more strict, some are more creative, some are prone to making rash or problematic decisions, and this is ever more complex by the way in which different Space Marine chapters approach the ideas set out in the Codex Astartes. And of course the ideology and teachings of their own Primarchs is passed down through generations of Marines in the chapters, and before this, the Legions. So one Marine who might be considered to be stepping outside of the lines for, say, an Ultramarine could be very much seen as just a strict Boy Scout within another chapter, whereas within each chapter there'll be a spectrum of these kinds of disciplines, and Auriel Ventress is definitely more on the creative side of things. Within the Ultramarines, he's one of those who considers the Codex to be more of a guide and less of a strict rulebook, which is definitely not something that is the norm within the Ultramarines. Now, we don't know too much more about this book, so we can't dive into it with much more detail, but the pre-release blurb describes to us how Auriel Ventress, newly ascended to the ranks of Primaris, leads warriors of the 4th Company from the Indomitus Crusade of Robert Guilliman to a world on the frontiers of Ultramar. Once a battleground against the Orcs, Sycorax is now under furious assault from an enemy of ancient times, the Necrons. The Ultramarines have faced these baleful Xenos before, but Uriel senses the hand of a foe from his own past at work in Sycorax. The tally, unfinished and a debt to the Imperium, finally come due. Trapped deep in a devastated city, Uriel leads the Swords of Calth into battle and must adapt to his new incarnation as one of the Primaris, a challenge that will test his soul as much as it will test him as a warrior. The final lines here are what are most intriguing for me. We haven't really had much in the way of seeing Marines adapt to the process of Primaris conversion, and knowing what a truly excellent author Graham McNeil is, I'm anticipating us hearing with some detail about the trauma of Primaris conversion and how this affects an Astartes who has had to go through this process, coupled as well with adapting to working alongside actual Primaris from the Ultima Founding and the Indomitus Crusade, who are likely not Marines who have crossed the Rubicon, so to speak. Penitent. Now, another title that I'm certain people are going to be greatly looking forward to. This is from Dan Abnett, and it's a novel about the fabled Elizabeth Bequin. The blurb tells us about how, in the mysterious city of Queen Mab, the forces of light and darkness are locked in a murderous struggle for truth. The dedicated agents of the Holy Inquisition battle with their shadowy counterparts, the infamous Cognitae. To discover the encrypted identity of the enigmatic all-powerful King in Yellow, caught at the heart of this struggle is the pariah Elizabeth Bequin. Will she stand with the Inquisition or with the Cognitae that raised her? And if she chooses the Inquisition, will it be the wise but ruthless Ravenor or his rival, the denounced heretic Eisenhorn? Bequin must withstand an onslaught of angels and demons and even the monstrous warriors of the traitor legions to unpick the greatest riddle of her life. Unsurprisingly, it sounds pretty epic. I'm totally here for it. They also mentioned they're going to release Pariah again, the book, alongside this, which makes sense because it's been out of print for some time, and it's also a focus on Elizabeth Bequin. And then we come to Gate of Bones, which is a continuation of the Dawn of Fire series. Now, the first book was Avenging Sun, and it discussed around the Indomitus Crusade, various conflicts going on there. This new book is a continuation on that theme. These, to me, always feel more like the battle stories that we had previous. If you don't know the battle stories, they're basically kind of short stories focused on Space Marine battles. It's fairly self-explanatory. So these focus a little bit less on the philosophical details and more on the actual conflicts and so on. So Gate of Bones' summary explains how a fleet of ships leaves Terra to stabilize Imperium Sanctus after the Great Rift. Guilliman leads a huge force to a shrine world as stable warp routes are enabling ships to cover the galactic southern region of the Imperium. Warnings though come from an ancient race and silence from the Force tasked to hold this shrine world. So Guilliman sends a recon team forward to establish the situation, headed by some Custodes. They discover a world on the brink of destruction, a beaten Imperial force and agents of the Despoiler who have unearthed an ancient evil that threatens not just Guilliman, but indeed Holy Terror itself. Heaven help us. I have a vague feeling that likely Terra is going to be just fine. These kind of books tend to be less heavyweight than some of the others in the Heresy series, the Siege of Terra, Eisenhorn, etc. Like I said, they are a bit more focused on battles and logistical deployments of Imperial forces, but you know, I wouldn't say this makes them any less worthwhile. They just have a different perspective, a different focus. And if as a reader you're able to scan through pages like me, I've kind of forced myself to do that, otherwise I would never be able to read stuff as quickly as I need to, you can smash through them pretty quickly. If you can kind of just read through pages and get the gist, this tends to be how I read battle books. I have to really take a look at it myself though to see if it's more than generic combat schlock or if there is a little bit more to it. Now, how comical that I should have mentioned recently the Liber Chaotica again, and now they come to announce Liber Xenologis. Now, just like Liber Chaotica, there has been another book which has been viewed, I would say, with heavy skepticism as to its legitimacy for some time, and that book is of course Xenology, which was meant to be something like an Imperial bestiary. It's a completely in-fiction guide to Xenos as told from the perspective of Imperial biologists dissecting and observing Xenos. It includes a lot of anatomy and dissected examples of alien species. However, this book came out in 2005. Some of its descriptions, including, for example, the Tau, have been viewed skeptically because, for example, it talks about how the Tau and the Ethereals are somehow perhaps controlling the lower Tau. Hey, you know, I feel like I've heard that concept somewhere before. Oh yes, it was my Tau video, where everyone rallied on me about this. Well, I'm sorry to say, it's in established official material. Now look, okay, for people that don't get it, my whole Tau video was meant to be a little bit fun humor. Some people didn't get it. But even apart from my video, this whole idea about the Tau ethereals controlling people, it just didn't sit well with a lot of people, notably Tau fans. So Xenology is often regarded similarly to Liber Chaotica as something of a rogue title that shouldn't be strictly considered because reasons. So Liber Xenologist, this new book, is going to be quite an interesting release because will it double down and embed, if not establish, some of the things described in Xenology, or perhaps it may contradict them. Or maybe neither. Let's wait and see. Regardless, it's a background book that gives us more detail beyond just characters, and that is always incredibly welcomed. I wish we had a lot more stuff like that. The blurb for the book states that the Imperium is beset by horrors. Xenospecies too numerous to mention are bent on our destruction. Only by naming and studying these predators does humanity stand any chance of survival, and by circumstance or perhaps by divine will, it has fallen to me, Captain Janus Drake, rogue trader and first son of House Drake, to codify the myriad threats aligned against us. In the westernmost reaches of the galaxy, I have braved the nightmarish pits of the Blackstone Fortress and the lawless dens of its orbital platform precipice. Through exploration of those treacherous environs, I have unearthed truths hidden from even the most learned Terran scholars. Here, in the galaxy's first truly comprehensive work of Xenology, I have delineated the terrifying face of our foe. A pretty strong description, and it sounds like it promises a lot. So I am more than hyped for this, perhaps more than some of these other books that I've been talking about. I'm curious how this is going to be framed though, that's the main thing. The former Xenology was a very cold, almost harrowing description of Imperial biologists seemingly cutting up Xenos either by dissection or vivisection. It reminded of some of the most truly appalling acts of humanity that we're capable of. And that is obviously quite a dark perspective to put out there, but nonetheless it's very accurate to how the Imperium views things. That is to say, why would they consider the suffering of Xenos at all? Because they're Xenos. They don't give a shit. They don't care about these guys at all. So I'm curious how this new book is going to be framed. Or is it going to be more like a 19th century explorer, because it's a rogue trader, describing with wonder as he observes these things that he sees, but basically staying at a distance? Or is it going to be a bleak exploration of Xenos through disturbing surgery and the study of anatomy? Let's wait and see. I will definitely be doing a follow-up on this though. Next up, yes, for those of us who are fans of THRAKA, of which I imagine is everyone, it's great news that we're having a new book focused on him and his endless fight against the planet of Armageddon. Seriously, if I was living on Armageddon, I would have tried to relocate myself at this point in time. Ghazghkull appeared a bit during Psychic Awakening, but it was not heavy stuff like much of the material in those books. It felt more like a precursor to some later heavy material, which I hope is going to be forthcoming from Black Library, and it sort of seems to be, because this book we're seeing right here. The blurb says, of the billions of greenskins who swarm the galaxy, only the name of one strikes fear into the hearts of human and Xenos alike. Ghazghkull Mag Urk THRAKA, warlord of warlords, the beast of Armageddon, the prophet of the Warg. With his tusks and fists and power claw, he does the holy work of Gork and Mork, and soon all worlds will burn in his boot prints. Mystery shrouds how such a beast came to exist, and rumours abound that the mighty warlord was once just like any other orc. But if that is the case, how did his ascendants come to be? Many have lost their minds trying to unravel the mystery. Lord Inquisitor Titonida Falx has headed into the murky depths of heresy to find the answer, only this time something is different. She possesses something that others did not. Custody of the one creature in the universe who claims to know the truth of it all. Ghazghkull's banner bearer, Makari the Grot. Lastly, we have some new Adepta Sororitas material. There are many titles covering the Sisters at this point, and I would recommend Mark of Faith, the Sisters Omnibus, including Faith and Fire, Hammer and Anvil, Red and Black, Heart and Soul. The Sisters books are good stuff to read because they don't focus just on the Sororitas. They're not like battle books. They dive into the troublesome world of the ecclesiarchy. They deal with the issues of faith in the Imperium and how this is viewed by those who adhere to the ideas of the Emperor as the true god of humanity. There are also fascinating descriptions of how the Sisters' faith is utilized, which is in fact what led me to my confusion around the descriptions in the Psychic Awakening and Pariah, but I'm not going to get into that again now. The blurb for the Book of Martyrs tells us, "To die in the name of the God Emperor of mankind is to live eternal, and none are more willing to bleed in his name than the Adeptus Sororitas." The Book of Martyrs charts the deaths of these exemplars. Sister Zishani of the Orders Hospitalier, serving alongside the death-obsessed Valorous Heart, tends to her ecclesiarchy charges as something inhuman hunts the fields. Sister Anasia of the Order of Our Martyr Lady, taken captive by the vile Tau Empire, seeks to teach her interrogators what it truly means to be one of the faithful. On a regressed Imperial world, Sister Superior Laurelyn of the Order of the Bloody Rose reinforces the beleaguered defenders against a familiar foe turned anew by the Great Rift. And in the age of the Indomitus Crusade, with the galaxy split in two, only one thing is certain: there'll be no shortage of martyrs to fill the pages of this ancient tome. It sounds good stuff, and it makes me actually want to go and reread some of the previous Sisters stuff. For example, if you've never read about the living Saint Celestine and how she goes through the trials of resurrection, you're really missing out on what is arguably one of the greatest and most grimdark descriptions within 40k, as she struggles to find herself within an ethereal realm, clambering over a mountain of bones, not knowing who she is, who this emperor is, trying to find her way back to the light. That novel featuring this description is simply titled Celestine the Living Saint, and I highly recommend it. So lastly, I want to announce a couple of things here that are new for the channel coming next year. Now, many of you will have noted that Audible have been connecting with me on the channel here periodically throughout 2020. Now, this is obviously great because it's an excellent way, as I've said many times, to save on audiobooks. Plus, many of us like to be able to enjoy painting or doing other things whilst we listen to a 40k novel. Some of these audiobooks are very long, at anything over 10 hours. So spending a whole day painting minis whilst consuming 40k novels, that seems like a perfect way to make efficient use of your time. Now, I want to thank all of you guys because this Audible placement has been a success for me in 2020, and that means that Audible want to continue partnering with me here on the channel in 2021. However, I have decided to switch things up a bit in a way that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. Now, I still will be having a bit of promo on the occasional video, and I want to note that not every video, just periodically as per before. But what I'll be doing though is, instead of just giving you guys a recommendation in the videos, I'm going to tie that in with what will essentially be an audiobook club. Now, what is that, Lutin? Well, around the first week of a month beginning this January, I'll post likely on my community tab announcing what audiobook we will be listening to for that month. Now, hopefully as well, people will use my specific Audible URL to get involved, but if you're already using Audible, no problem, it's not restricted to just new people or anything like that. And I've decided to run these over a month period so that people have plenty of time to listen to whatever audiobook is chosen in between their work, family, whatever else people have going on. Now, I will additionally promo that specific recommendation within my Audible segment on a video to encourage people to want to get involved. And this could come, of course, anything more like the middle of a month. It just depends on when I have a video that's going to be good to go. But I'll give everybody a heads up at the start of each month in the first week as to what we're going to be focusing on regardless. And then at the end of the month, on the last day of the month, to make it easy to remember, the last day of each month, I will be hosting a live stream, probably around 1 to 2 hours, something like that. I can't host for much longer than that because of my vocal health. There's a possibility I may have guests as well, and we will discuss that audiobook in the live stream. And generally, we will talk about the events within it, how it sits within the lore, and so on. Now, of course, this will be open to all, so anybody can come in and listen. The specific time of this is yet to be set, but I will likely choose a time that is going to suit both European and US time zones, as I know that this is the largest bulk of my audience. I will try to make it something around 10 PM UK time, as this is going to be the early and mid-afternoon for people in the US, and it's going to be later evening for us in Europe. Now, obviously, no time is going to be ever ideal for everybody, but you've got to choose something. Now, I plan initially to do this on my Twitch because I know Twitch well at this point, twitch.tv/Lutin. However, it is possible that I will transition this over to YouTube because that seems somewhat sensible given the fact that I rarely stream on Twitch anymore and that the vast majority of my entire audience is here on YouTube. Seems pretty sensible, so I'm going to look at doing that. Now, obviously, I'll be reading people's questions in the chat. I will be generally discussing the book. I will note and remind people of this when we do the live stream, that an hour or two goes very quickly, especially when discussing something like a novel. So when I do those live streams, any questions from chat need to be reasonably focused on the audiobook we're discussing. I'm not just going to go off discussing things that aren't relevant or just plain wildly off topic. So I'm not going to be discussing anything like that. It's going to be focused singularly on the audiobook, as that is the purpose of the live stream. So that's the idea for 2021, a monthly audiobook club where you guys can get involved via my Audible placement here on the channel, and then on the last day of the month I'll host a live stream where we can collectively discuss it. I'm quite excited for this because I think it's going to be a very enjoyable addition to what I have going on here, and best, it won't be prohibitive in terms of taking up my time from the channel. So I think this will be a fun way to add some interaction for you guys, plus it's a good partnership for me with Audible, so basically it's wins all around. And then my last thing to mention is that to kick this off, I'll be doing a giveaway for you guys. I apologize in advance that I'll be restricting this to the US and Europe to save me on the mad postage, but also just the difficulty of distribution that's going on because of COVID. But what will this giveaway be and how is it being handled? Well, it's going to be on the first live stream, so the end of the month, January, when I do this audiobook club. And all you're going to need to do is just be in that live stream in the chat. It'll be a very simple entry system within chat, so no fuss about what it is or anything like that. No restrictions for subs, no multiple entry nonsense. It's a straight giveaway. Be in the chat. What can you win? I have several of the new Codex books to give away. Space Wolves, Deathwatch. I've got the new Forge World Compendium book. I've got one of the Necromunda supplement books. It's my hope that by doing this giveaway in the live stream, it'll be more likely to go to somebody who actually wants them and is going to use them to actually play the games with. But I may even throw in a box of Marines or something like that on top. So that's what's going to be happening in this first audiobook live stream. End of the month, January. And I'll post about it, as I say, in the community tab. So it's just a bit of a bonus for you guys to come and check things out, get involved. If anything changes, I say I will update on the community tab here on YouTube, which as well I plan to continue using ever more going forward. So make sure to check in there now and again, as I will often ask questions or just update you about the channel, what's going on with me via the community tab. So that's the end of this update overview video for today, guys. Big thanks as always to you all for supporting me here on the channel. I want to get some more actual painting and miniatures related stuff here back on the channel, but there is also, of course, more lore on the way. Dark Origins Part 4, like I said in the beginning, is being edited by me right now, and that is my next video in the pipeline. So if you enjoyed today, guys, please drop a like. Every time you guys like or you interact with my videos, you are quite literally helping support me as a full-time content creator. So please remember, it makes a bigger difference than you probably realize to drop a like and a comment. So as always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.